Thank you for listening to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast, available on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Stitcher. Also, please follow Matt's Movie Reviews on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Reddit, Instagram, and MeWe. And of course, be sure to visit mattsmoviereviews.net for the latest reviews, top 10 lists, and more. Now, on to the show.
One of our own, Serena Vasquez, is getting a heart. The donor is an 18-year-old boy from Buffalo. The incision time is 9 a.m.
There's been a complication in the OR.
Serena Vasquez is dead.
We can't waste a heart. It goes to somebody else in this hospital.
It has to be beating by 11 a.m. We need to be prepping someone else by 9:30, the latest.
Talk about getting thrown into the fire on your first day.
Then sort through the matches, make a decision.
Our first patient is Janet Pike.
The idea of having someone else's heart in her body is disturbing to her.
Yet she's still listed.
You want Walter to have the heart.
Walter has the right disposition.
If I get rejected again, just let me go home.
Third match is Trip Granger.
His father's Emmett Granger, Granger Venture Partners.
When I heard about that heart, I couldn't help but think that God was looking after us.
We can agree to disagree.
$25 million. We picked Trip, and we're saving much more than one patient.
I spent 10 years of my life on this committee. Suddenly there's money in the equation. We got this guy looking over our shoulder.
Trying to figure out what a day of life is worth.
It's always been about maximizing assets. Unfortunately, the assets happen to be human organs.
You haven't disclosed everything. You're lying about your health.
You need to name a successor.
It's blood money.
Let the committee decide that.
We take it and we put it to work.
They had to cut another deal to keep this quiet.
Dr. Taylor, you're the decider.
Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 376. Out now on digital is The God Committee, a medical drama that focuses on an organ transplant committee as they debate which of two patients deserve a life-saving heart and how the ramifications of their decision affects them several years later. Featuring a terrific cast that includes Kelsey Grammer, Julia Stiles, and Coleman Domingo, the God Committee delves into the important issue of organ donation and transplantation and does so with compelling storytelling and stylish craft. And joining me today is the writer and director of the God Committee, Austin Stark. Austin, I thank you so very much for joining me today.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, it's really interesting. This film is the adaptation of a play, off-Broadway play. I think it came out back in 2006 or so. What was it about the play? I believe you actually already received the ID for the film. You didn't see the play and wrote it yourself. Producers got in touch with you. What was it about that script that you received that really kind of resonated with you in regards to the themes of the film?
Yeah, well, I had actually, it was interesting because years before I was sent the play, I had heard a story about a wealthy man who was very sick and he needed an organ, bribing a hospital in the Northeast in America for a new organ. And that story kind of blew me away. And I had no idea that kind of thing could happen. And it stuck with me. And when Ari Pinchot and Jonathan Rubinstein, two of the film's producers, sent me the script, it just came rushing back, and I knew that I wanted to be a part of it. I also felt like the play was fairly compelling, and I really appreciated the way that Mark St. Germain had set it. The play was set all in the boardroom. Mm-hmm. And he's done a great, which is really difficult, even though it is a play, but he kept it moving, and it was really compelling, and it brought up some issues that really made me think and expanded my knowledge on the organ transplant system. Not only was it insightful, but I learned a lot. And shocked in many ways.
As I mentioned before, that play came out in 2006, and I believe you were in production on this film, like filming in 2019. So that's a big kind of gap right there. Regarding the film, the technology of organ donation, organ transplant, etc., that's a big gap between. I'm sure there's been so many leaps and bounds between the time the play was, out to by the time you started shooting. How far into kind of like researching in regards to that aspect of the whole kind of organ transplant, organ donation world do you go into, and how much does that kind of frame the story that you made? Because while that film is set, the play is set in the ballroom, your movie has a different structure, has leaps of time, and it has been set in different kind of places and areas as well.
Yeah, I mean, from a macro perspective, I wanted to put my own stamp on the material and make it my own, and so I was planning from the very beginning to update it and really to make it more cinematic as well, because obviously you're adapting a script. But beyond that, yeah, I did a lot of research. I worked with a couple medical consultants on the script because I did want that side of it to be as realistic as possible. Like, I wanted to make the most realistic medical drama that's ever come out, and so I paid very close attention to that side. But I also, as you alluded to, I also expanded the script and created another storyline that is framed around xenotransplantation, which is essentially it's essentially transplanting organs and tissues cross species. So there's various companies, the most famous being eGenesis, where they're growing humanized organs in pigs because pigs have similar sized organs to humans, and trying to use gene editing technology to get the human body to be able to accept the organs. And because rejection, like organ rejection, is the biggest problem with being able to transplant organs cross species. And so there's various companies that are trying to crack this technology. And I think it's really interesting. And it's a big business. You can invest on the stock market. There's various companies using CRISPR technology, which is essentially, which is what they're using in order to try to crack xenotransplantation. And so I felt like that was very compelling of itself, and organically it fit with the framework of Mark's story. Yep. And sort of it felt like very much in the same world, and I felt like I was creating a more expansive look at the organ transplant system by including that.
The structure of the film is really interesting because you see the events that are happening in that ballroom, and then you see the ramifications of these decisions like several years afterwards. Coming up with that kind of structure there, that's really interesting to me, because in many ways, it feels like that these actors are playing dual roles. They're playing the same characters, but the differences between the two timelines is so different between them. Kelsey Grammer especially, I mean, that feels like he's playing two different characters in a sort of way. That's a really kind of interesting way to put the film together.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason what attracted them, because they are different characters and they've arced, because they are set 7 years apart. Their characters have changed so much throughout the course of those 7 years. And on another level, I just find it interesting how, structurally, how the past is constantly informing the present and vice versa. And so I made sure that when we're cutting back and forth, that there's, whether it's a plot link or a thematic link, that those two timelines are always linking up together and feeling cohesive. And so we're learning things, which I think is just a compelling way to tell a story. We're learning things about the present from the past and vice versa. And just on a more thematic level, I think it's interesting how our decisions, how decisions that we make can have such a great impact on our lives and many other lives as well, which is, what we explore in the film.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by 80s Tees. 80s Tees is an online retailer of licensed t-shirts and pop culture gear from your favorite movies, TV shows, cartoons, video games, comic books, and musicians. Celebrate your inner 80s nerd and click on the link in the show notes below to get the raddest retro t-shirts delivered to your door. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Loot Crate. Founded in 2012, Loot Crate is the worldwide leader in fan subscription boxes. Loot Crate partners with industry leaders in entertainment, gaming, sports, and pop culture to deliver monthly themed crates, produce interactive experiences in digital content, and film original video productions. No matter what you geek out about, Loot Crate has a subscription box for you. To get your very own exclusive collectibles, apparel, and gear delivered to your door, be sure to click on the link in the show notes below. The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is also brought to you by Vudu. Watch the latest movies and TV shows anytime, anywhere. No subscriptions, no contract. Enjoy stunning quality in up to 4K ultra high definition at home and download and watch on your mobile device as well. To rent and buy from over 100,000 titles or watch thousands of movies free with Vudu Movies on us, be sure to click on the link in the show notes below. Now, back to the show. Interesting. I remember a quote that you said in a, I think it might have been when you were doing press for The Runner, talking about how filmmaking is like, you're essentially making 3 different films. You have the script, and then you have the filming of the movie, and then you have the editing of the film as well. So you are a guy with your hands in a lot of different pies. You're a writer, you're a director, you're a producer. Of those 3 different processes of the filmmaking, which one really kind of excites you the most when you're kind of like in the thick of it? Is it the creation of these ideas and put them on page? Is it seeing those ideas come come to life while working with these actors, or is it afterwards when you're piecing all this stuff together, make this kind of like jigsaw into kind of like a comprehensive movie at the end of it?
I enjoy all 3 stages. I love writing, and I get lost in it, and I spend, to write a script. This took me 9 months, and I kind of just I like just wearing sweatpants and sitting around and writing and creating, and that's fun, and not having to, and sort of living in your own world and being disconnected from other people, which is nice for a period of time. But then I love being on set and working with actors and working with our crew and trying to be the leader of the ship, and I enjoy that. And then editing, where you're making a whole another version of the movie. It's interesting because you can really, like, it has such a great influence. Like I always say, you could have a great film and a poor editor, and you'll have a mediocre film. Right. You could have a poor film and a fantastic editor and have a good film. And so it's so important. And I really enjoy the whole process. I mean, the one thing I could take or leave is the business side of filmmaking. I don't think it's the most fun business, but I don't do this for money, and I do it because I love it, because I'm passionate about the craft.
I want to talk about Kelsey Grammer, who's like terrific in the movie, and he plays the role of Dr. Andre Boxer, who's kind of like the chief kind of like doctor in regards to not only the organ transplantation process, but also the research behind it. When you're talking about eugenesis and such, he's pretty much the spearhead of that whole kind of thing in the movie. I think a lot of people in Australia particularly know him more for his comedic work with Frasier and The Simpsons and Cheers, etc. He's such a great dramatic actor, though, isn't he? That's kind of like his bread and butter. And that voice as well. I mean, you talk about voices in the history of TV and cinema. I reckon that's one of just like the great kind of like voices as well that's ever been kind of like heard through these mediums. What's it like working with him, especially since, is it true that he was actually, you were thinking about him to play the role of Father Dunbar instead of the doctor character?
That is true. I do feel, and just going back to your point, I feel like he is so underappreciated as a dramatic actor. He's got some real props, and you can see it in this film. But yes, we offered him the role of Father Dunbar originally, and he called me up and he was like, I love your script, and I could play Father Dunbar in my sleep, and I've done that, and I would be happy to do it. But what I really think would be interesting is if I played Boxer. He's like, because I've been doing this for decades and I've never played this character. And I thought about it, and I was like, you know what, you're right. Let's do it. And so that's how we got started. And he's a pro. He comes very prepared. And he was doing this not for the money. He wasn't getting paid a lot. This is an indie film, and he was doing this because he loved it, and it really showed. And he worked so hard, and it was very impressive and inspiring.
When I look at your filmography as not only a writer, director, but a producer as well, you produced several films before this. You had Detachment and in Infinitely, Polar Bear, and a bunch of other films as well. There's a through line throughout all these movies, which as a lot of these films deal with social commentary issues, maybe even kind of like political issues, but very kind of moral kind of driven storytelling. And in my opinion, the greatest filmmaker to kind of do that was Sidney Lumet. His movies were
somebody that influenced me.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to ask, because his movies were the ones that got me into movies. I remember the first time I saw Serpico on the late night when I was a teenager, and that kind of like got me into this whole thing like this. That's where the journey began for me. And this film in particular, The God Community, a lot of people, especially regarding the play and the setting that it was in, kind of make comparisons to 12 Angry Men, which of course was Lumet's kind of first film. How big of an influence is he not only on your career as a director and writer, but when it comes to your studio, Paper Match Films, is it?
Paper Street Films.
Paper Tree Films. When it comes to that as well, when it comes to the philosophy of the films that you make, how much of an impact does that filmmaker, Sidney Lumet especially, have on you as an artist and the person who makes stories for a living?
Yeah, I would say a great impact, especially for this film. I mean, I naturally, as you noticed over the course of my career, I've gravitated towards socially conscious films, and I just, that's where my taste is. Would I do something else? Perhaps. And I have, as a producer, I've produced other films, but certainly as a director, I like doing films that can make people think about the world around them, and hopefully films that they'll take home with them and feel like that they got something out of them in a meaningful way. And Lumet, certainly. Alan Pakula is another filmmaker that I was influenced by. On this. And I guess J.C. Chandor or Margin Call. It's something that was in the same world that certainly influenced me when I was working on this.
Speaking of Lumet, he's a great New York filmmaker. You are a New Yorker yourself. God Community was actually filmed in New York. I want to get the timelines right, though. 2019 is when God Community was filmed. That was just before the pandemic hit the States. Is that correct?
That was what?
That was just before the pandemic hit the US?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was before the pandemic, and we were actually the film was meant to premiere at Tribeca in 2020, and then the pandemic hit, and which was really disappointing, obviously. And then we waited a while and finally took it out to studios, and we ended up bringing on Universal, who's releasing the film in Australia and many other territories, and Vertical Entertainment in the US. And we got a chance to premiere it at the Tribeca Film Festival this year, a year later. So it was pretty rewarding. And then the film was rolled out shortly after that. So it worked out well.
What's the state of filmmaking like now in New York City? Is there are filmmakers waiting to get this stuff done there? Are they going to different states to get this stuff done? What do you think the future is going to be like in New York regards to getting films up and running again?
I mean, it seems like in New York in particular, it feels like everything's really getting back to normal now. And I've heard that productions probably back to about like 85-90% of where it was. But for a while, it was pretty dark. But it's great to see, and it doesn't feel like a hindrance. Like I'm finishing a new script right now that I want to shoot probably this winter. I think spring could be, I think it could easily be spring, but it doesn't feel like a hindrance at all and an issue to be shooting in this area. That's
great to hear, because, as just in a discussion we've been having about Lumet and such, I love New York-based films, some films shot in New York, so it's so excellent to hear that filmmakers are going to be able to get back in a swing of things in regards to that. When it comes to this whole kind of pandemic situation and in regards to your film as well, what I find really interesting about The God Community is that to me, it feels like a tribute to doctors, like a thank you note in certain way. Your film actually begins with a collage of images from doctors. I'm going to guess probably from like the early like 1900s, perhaps, kind of like in the infancy of kind of like a lot of the stuff you see now, like all of the men and women, and they put together kind of like the research and to make the innovative steps forward to get the procedures that we have going today. How much of it for you is to make a tribute not only to like the doctors, but especially in this day and age where medical staff, doctors, nurses, anyone associated with that should be kind of like lauded and then deservedly so with all the hard work they've been doing the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like in many ways the film is more relevant, became more relevant after COVID, even though we shot it before. And it is a love letter to doctors. And, at the heart of it, it's about this team of doctors having to make life and death decisions under extraordinary circumstances. And, the film, at the center of the film is the question, like, is it justifiable to sacrifice one life to save many? And I think all of those things we can relate in various ways to COVID, from ventilators to hospital beds to the vaccine, And so even though the film doesn't deal with COVID at all, obviously, because it was before that time and that's not what the movie is, we could certainly relate it to this crazy period that we've been through in many, many ways.
Well, the film does deal with a very pressing issue in regards to organ donation and organ transplant. I know this, I think, an issue in Australia that a lot of people kind of like talk about quite a bit. And it's like a big push to get people to offer their organs after they kind of pass away and such. In the US, how big of an issue is it there? And how much of a kind of like a big push is there to get people to kind of like, volunteer their organs after they pass on, to make sure that there are, life can go on for a lot of other people after some other people pass on?
Yeah, it's a huge problem. I mean, there's 120,000 people on the waiting list, and I think it's somewhere between 12 and 17 people die each day waiting for an organ. And so it's a huge problem. And I think one of the things that I was hoping to do with this film was to shed light on how serious the organ shortage is. And if anything, I hope that people can walk away from that understanding, because it's not something that we talk about very often. I don't read about it in the news, but it's a serious issue. And it's also, why I wanted to shed some light on xenotransplantation as well, because if they're able to solve this, able to make that work and use CRISPR technology in order to grow humanized organs in animals and be able to transplant them to people, that will save millions of lives. That could be game changing. And it's real, and they're getting close to doing it. And so we'll see. But and I tried to offer a hopeful message about the future, with that last scene. I won't get too specific to give away any spoilers, but with that technology, and that's how I feel. I do feel hopeful about the future.
So for everyone out there listening, the God Committee available now on digital in the US, in Australia as well. It's not only a well-performed and crafted movie, but it's a movie that deals with a really important issue. And I thank you very much, Austin Stark, for making the film and for talking with me today about the film, because the more people that watch it, the more people know about this issue, and then hopefully we can change hearts and minds in regards to it.
Yeah, no, well, thanks so much for having me on, Matt. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content. Also, if you would like to request a review and support my work, please join my Patreon via the link in the description below.